Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. You hear me okay?
Yeah, I
All right.
have on the bottom of my screen, there's a logo with like a red dash through it. It looks like a screen. I don't
I
know.
have that screen here as well. But
Okay,
I see you perfectly.
How are you
great.
doing, everybody? All
All
right.
here. How you doing, man?
Very good evening. Guys, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please, there's lots of requests there to ask questions. We'll try and get through them towards the end. Can I just get a big round of applause by way of XXX's for Tristan and Mia for giving their time tonight to get involved. As usual, stellar work from a couple of really great pros.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Look at all
delighted.
the love.
Oh wow.
There's
There we
So
go.
we'll just wait for Lenny there. Ray, if you can just keep an eye and see if he's asking any questions individually on the inbox there.
Sorry, Paul, you've gone echoey, and I've gone echoey.
Mm.
Echoey.
What is that?
How are you getting on, Tristan?
Good. I moved the modem. I'm like sitting pretty much with the modem on the. I had to run.
Here's the main
Everyone
man
else
now.
talking about-
Hi all.
Hey,
Merry
Lenny.
Christmas.
Merry
Hey,
Christmas.
Lenny, how are you?
I like the trees. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Man, absolutely. Lenny, just a quick one. Thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate that. It means a great deal to us personally and also to our audience as well. So thank
Delighted.
you so much.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, mate. You're very good. So yeah, myself and Ray will dip off and do all the tech crap behind the scenes. Mia Mullarkey, who I believe you know a little bit at this point, and Tristan Heanue is a filmmaker from Connemara and an old mate of mine. So yeah, best of luck, guys. Enjoy the discussion. Try and keep your questions in the chat bar for the time being, and we will admit people from the moderation panel towards the end of the chat, and maybe you can ask some questions. Thank you so much, guys, and enjoy.
Thanks, Paul.
Lovely.
See you guys.
No worries.
How are you? We've lost Lenny, have we?
No?
I'm here.
Have you?
Yeah, I still-
Oh, I don't have a picture. No.
do you see
I
me?
can still hear you. I can see you, Mia. Yeah,
But not Lenny.
but not Lenny.
Oh,
But I
hang-
can hear. I can hear you.
Can you hear me? That's weird because will you allow app to see your screen? Oh no, I was trying to share my screen. I don't want to do that now.
Guys, just quickly, just a little thing. If you have some headphones or cans, just stick them in if you have them handy. It's quite echoey.
Don't think I do. Am I very echoey, Paul?
No, you're fine, Lenny. It's just more so the other guys.
Okay.
Oh,
I
really?
actually, I don't have any on me.
I don't have any
Okay.
with me.
Don't worry about it. If you can't hear it, it's not happening. So don't worry about it. Go ahead. All right, I'm really gone this time. There's stuff to do.
So are you okay, Tristan? Will we jump
I
in?
wonder,
I'm okay. I have no picture for Lenny, but I can hear him, so
can you see me, Mia?
it's fine.
Yeah, I can see you.
I wonder, is it like just something in the settings? It might be Tristan. It might be like yeah, God knows. But sure, at least if you can hear me, and hopefully everybody else can see us all. It's
Yeah, I don't see any
Yeah, people are
messages.
saying we can see and hear you all.
Okay.
I saw you at the start, and then you just disappeared. It's maybe you'll come back. We'll plow on regard.
I'm back like a bad smell. I'll be back.
Aw. Very self-deprecating.
Lovely to meet you, Lenny.
And you, Tristan. Lovely to meet you.
So Tristan and I were kind of having like a pre-chat, and we were saying maybe a nice approach would be just to go through your body of work chronologically. And then Tristan and I have both directed some shorts, and we're sort of, we're at a point where we're both ready to move into features. And so in a way, this is really nice for us to pick your brains. And I guess what we'd love to learn is like, what were your big lessons on each production, or what's
Sure.
been building and growing on that journey?
Sure.
And I guess especially the first one, because I know you went from with the commercials into
Yeah,
Adam and Paul, and how did you find that
absolutely.
transition? You
Sure.
know, and
Totally. I mean, and I'm happy to kick off with whatever if you want to start there.
yeah, I think it's a good.
Yeah, exactly. Let's start there.
Well, the thing was, I'd had a bit of a roundabout journey before that, because I started messing around with making things when I was probably 19, 20, and I wasn't studying film, but I was friends with Ed Guiney. We still work really closely together, and we'd set up this sort of small little filmmaking club in college, and I made a few little bits through that, and then leaving college, I made a short. So that was like, and I hadn't thought about commercials at all then. And then I went off. I studied philosophy, and I went off to do more studying of that abroad. But I kind of wanted to make films. I kind of knew at that point, even when I was going away. And I came back, and then I had this kind of really bad, like 5 years, I'd say, where I felt like I was stuck, and I thought I'd made a terrible mistake, and I was writing, and I just didn't believe what I was writing, and I even got support for some of the things, but I didn't want to make them, and I was in a sort of bad spot where I thought it's never going to happen, and then I think something in me just said, right, unless I start doing something, then this could go very badly wrong. I could be still talking about this in 15 years and not have done anything. So I said, right, I need to make money as well. So what do I need to do practically? And I thought, well, I have some filmmaking experience. I've made some stuff, some prop promos and shorts and things like that. And I went and I hawked myself around the commercials companies. And I was lucky to be taken on by this guy, Johnny Spears, who then paid for me to do a sort of demo commercial. And I started to get quite a lot of work. And it was really good for me psychologically, even though I always thought of myself as I was always drawn to, art cinema, really, and I never liked that word, but there's no other good word for it. And that's what I always saw myself doing. So I'd been probably really sniffy about commercials, but like somehow something in me kind of knew I have to be making things, and I have to actually test myself, because it's very easy to be a complete purist and hold yourself to ridiculously high standards as a way of actually not doing anything. It's a very easy trap to fall into, I think. Yeah. And something in me knew that I had to actually see, maybe I'm just crap, maybe I'm good at this, maybe it's all bluster. So I said, I will shoot anything that anybody lets me shoot. And so I started to, and then turns out I was quite good at commercials, and I found myself gaining confidence by just having to go out there. We were shooting on 35 mil, and there were budgets, and there were clients, and all this kind of stuff that actually has stood me in very good stead when it's come to feature making, and you're dealing with funders and studios and execs and things like that. And I found I was good at that part of it. I could talk about it, and I could make people feel confident, and I could do all that. And through doing that, and also the craft of telling stories within 30 seconds or a minute, or all of that stuff, and just doing it again and again, it was really good. And I think the thing of testing yourself in that way, and just sort of forcing yourself to put your money where your mouth is, and make things it's really obvious in a way, because filmmaking is filmmaking. It's, if you were a writer, you'd sit there and you'd write, and so if you want to make stuff, you sort of have to find a way of doing that, no matter what version of it is. At least this is how it felt to me. So then I was doing that for quite a while, and I again then started to prevaricate about my actual vocation. In other words, I was going, well, this is working, and I'm doing well, and I'm traveling a bit with commercials, and I'm learning and stuff, and I'm actually making a living, which was kind of unheard of as a filmmaker. And I thought, and so I let a few years go by when I wasn't making, and I had the same feeling, which is I have to go back to what it is. Otherwise, in 15 years, I'll be doing this. And I met many, many commercials directors who were still talking about making a feature, and you just knew it was never going to happen. They were too deep in a mortgage, and too deep in a sort of lifestyle or whatever, or a comfort zone. So at that same time, Johnny, who I was working with, Johnny Spears, was also very keen to make a film, and he bumped into this guy, Mark O'Halloran, who was writing plays, and he said to Mark, do you ever think about making, do you ever write anything for films? And Mark said, oh, I've a like a desk drawer full of ideas, which it was a total lie. He actually he went off and he wrote a load of stuff on the basis of that conversation with Johnny. And Johnny said, here, look at this. And he gave me this envelope of things. And there's loads of really interesting things, but the one thing that stood out for me was like a fragment of like a few scenes and character description and an outline for this idea called Adam and Paul. And I was blown away, particularly by the dialogue, just by this kind of Beckettian quality to it. And I think I had this sort of moment where I thought, I can really see how that would work. Like, I can feel what that would be tonally. And I'd always been interested in, it was a weird amalgamation of things like silent comedy and Laurel and Hardy and all of these things that I'd loved as a kid. And this kind of slow slapstick of directors like Aki Kaurismäki from Finland and people like that. And I could suddenly see this. And Mark had a story which was very kind of, there was the characters were absolutely there and the tone of dialogue was absolutely there. But the story was quite sort of conventional, because I think Mark felt at that point, you've got to tell the story in this, there'll be a drug lord and they'll get into trouble in this way or that way. But then there were scenes that are still in the movie. But what I met Mark and we talked, and I said, I absolutely think this is genius. You've done something incredible here. But I suggest that there's a way of doing this in a really low key, sort of oddly circular sort of way that you don't need the drama. Like, I think my contribution was tone, and to say you don't have to hit the story points mid-act, second act, midpoint stuff. You don't have to do any of that. And we watched a lot of these movies that I'm talking about now, things like Kaurismäki's films and other sort of very left field films, and together sort of reshape the story. And I think what, for me, it was, to roundabout way of getting to your point, it was such a long journey to making that film. And I felt like I'd served my time doing commercials and things like that, but also I got out of my system a lot of that kind of pressure to show off. I think that one can sort of that can be in you if you've been waiting to make a film and you think, right, here's my chance. Now, I'm going to blow the doors off and show I'm going to do like the longest opening shot that ever was done. And I'm going to, and actually I think I got that out of my system, and I sort of, my instinct was good, which was to just make something pure, tonally very specific. And that feeling I had when I read those pages from Mark right at the beginning of the process is the feeling that I held, or tried to hold as much as I could, through the full range of, the full journey of making the film. And just be very true to that. And I think also because there were no expectations, I'd made some shorts, as I said, and I'd been floating around for quite a while by then. And that probably got me through the film board and allowed them to have enough faith for them to go, okay, let's not question overly this odd sort of picaresque kind of story, and let him do his thing because he's shown that there's some skill there. And I also had really good people around me because I gathered them through making commercials. So in that sense, although it was a first feature, it was a first way embodied a lot of experience that I'd had over a number of years. And I'm really glad, to finish my point, I'm really glad that I didn't make a feature straight after the shorts that I'd made like 7-8 years before that. Because I think I wouldn't have had the maturity to do it well had I made it, the first time around, if you know what I mean.
I think that's great because, I have an echo. There is a sense of urgency that you should, make your short and then make your feature, and, get known and show off and build something. And though you had a kind of a wise intuition to hold off and wait till something felt right. And what is it that, so you really sensed the tone of what Mark was trying to achieve. You didn't go for the big drug lord chase scene that you could have gone for. what allowed you to have those impulses and hold on to them so dearly?
Well, they were very much there from the very beginning, and that's an experience I've had a few times, and it's not always the way it works. So sometimes I get that kind of, I have, when very early on in an idea, have a kind of strong, like a really strong flavor or like a taste. So you kind of know what it's like. You know what it will, you kind of know what it should or will feel like. And for me, that just starts to gather up images, and they're not, it's not like, it's hard to explain. That I don't think it's not a sort of, I don't tend to work with very kind of symbolic visuals. You know, I don't think, oh yeah, there's going to be a kid in a red dress and everybody else is going to be dressed. That's not how I think. I think in terms of sort of oddly how time flows in a scene, or like a quality of the action, or a sense of kind of mood. And if I'm lucky enough to get that feeling early on, and if it's a strong feeling, then I do lose it and gain it. And it isn't like, it's a struggle. It's always a struggle. It's like remembering a dream. I always think it's a bit like remembering a dream. You know, when you wake up and it's incredibly alive, and the more you try and hold it, the more the details just evaporate. And there have been many times, and there will be many times for every filmmaker, where you're standing on set going, I don't know what this was supposed to be. Oh shit, I've lost that feeling, you know, and now I'm just making these decisions and I don't know what the decisions are based on. And maybe something we can talk about later in this, but how do you deal with that moment? Because everybody's going to feel it. And I think I've gained some insight into how you can kind of manage that feeling of like that you're suddenly in the middle of the scene. You've no kind of markers to guide you. But if I'm lucky enough, I think with Adam and Paul, I just had a really strong feeling, and I felt like I was right, you know. And it's a brilliant feeling, and that feeling then when you see the first scenes cut together, and if they've got even some of that in them, it's an incredibly exhilarating feeling, because you think, oh, I was trying to make some specific thing, and there's a bit of that in it, you know, which is the, like, and it's no small thing, because filmmaking's so messy that, like, quite often the essence can get lost in the detail, or in the, you know, in the sort of noise of it. And we talked about this, Mia, with regard to the short that you've been making. Like, you're trying to sort of capture this spark, or this, describe this, and one ends up writing like millions of notes to self, like, you know, loads of shot plans, loads of don't forget this, or, you know, remember this reference, because what you're trying to do is hold the dream. And you're trying to find a way of like nailing it down so that you don't lose it.
Well, you had a great piece of advice, because that was what I asked you just before the shoot, and I'd taken loads of notes. I had my shot list, mood board, etc. And you gave me this lovely piece of advice to approach each scene like you're discovering the scene, and, you know, the dialogue and the performance and the emotions as if you hadn't read the script already and you didn't meet those actors before. And you're actually quite intuitive and open then when it's an act of discovery, as opposed to, here's my notes and we have to hit the beats. And
yes.
And I found it was so liberating to have that in the back of my head.
I think the good thing about that, and like there are circumstances where you really do have lots of technical constraints, and, you know, if there's a stunt involved or whatever, you know, you have to sort of, storyboards are really useful and all that, and they can be really useful anyway. But I think that what's happening when you have that first rush about an idea is, part of the rush is the immediacy of, like, you live at that moment. You know, you read a book, or you have a thought, or you see somebody on the Lewis, and you get this feeling. Part of the kind of I suppose the power of that is that it's an immediate sort of thing that occurs to you, or that happens to you. And of course, then you go back to that well a lot, and you start writing notes, and you start to sort of put things together, and you're going to have conversations with the designer and the DP and all these people, and you're trying to use that feeling, and you're trying to pin things down. But I think the mistake then is to sort of let that go in the shoot and just execute. Like, you have to allow yourself to undergo something on the shoot as well. And it's scary a bit, because you go, oh, I would love to just know that now I've done my work. It's like I've prepped for the exam. I have it all there. It's all laid out. I'm going to do that. And the terrible thing is when you start doing that and it doesn't feel like anything. So I think, you know, allowing yourself, as we talked about, to sort of encounter it again, obviously within a very, in a space that you've educated yourself into, like you have done all this thinking and all this prep, and that's really relevant. But at some point you just have to like be a footballer and play the game again with all your prep and all your training and everything done, and be alive to the moment, because otherwise you are sort of, you could very easily make a dead version of that alive thing you thought about in the previous phase.
It's instinct, isn't it? It's so much of it is in the moment. If budgets or time constraints and you're told you can't get the shot that you needed, and it's instinct and collaboration. I think sometimes a DP will show you something better than you had planned, and I guess it's not being tied, is it? Just not being tied to what you planned. Totally.
And it'll never be the same. And actually there are scenes that I've shot which are really as I imagine them, and that's really nice. It's happened, you know, sometimes in a film there'll be like a scene where I could actually tell you that if I saw it filmically, it's that those shots are the shots that are there and that they cut in that order. But actually there is an energy to be found in throwing that away and listening to what other people are saying and watching the actors like you weren't just hoping that they will do the thing that you told them to do or that it says in the script, you know, but actually watching them and going, God, that's where the interesting thing in the scene is. Hadn't really seen that, you know. And if you're not open to that, if you're just like checking off what they're doing against script or against the storyboard in your head, you won't notice that thing that they've done, which is actually more interesting.
And you always leave it open to that possibility for them to have that flexibility within scenes or on just certain projects?
It depends on the scene, and it depends on, and of course you're always managing. There's that other part of you that has to be sort of managerial, and you're going, this might not be the moment to do it. This, you know, this afternoon might be the moment. That scene is the one where we want to just build a little bit more time into the schedule. I would tend to do it in the running of scenes on the day, like before you shoot. And there's great energy to be found there where you like run the scene just sometimes, you know, before. So in a very conventional way, I tend to like, I've done lots of work with the actors in advance. I've talked a lot with the DP and everybody, and there's all that stuff alive. But on the morning or the day, you get everybody there. You try and get a time for director's rehearsal, and you get cast and a few key people, and you run the scene. And you just, that's where you got to sort of, I think, drop the kind of, you know, coach kind of vibe and become a participant and watch what they do. And I tend to go, no matter what has been discussed in rehearsal, I usually don't say very much. Like I used to at the beginning, and this maybe is useful advice for people. At the beginning, I would come in and I would go, so all these things we talked about and all these ideas we have, and this is what's really happening in the scene. And here's where the real nub of it is. And actually that's just, you're turning all the cast into sort of receivers there, right? I tend to come in and say, like, as if I'm a bit, you know, sleepy or something. I'll just go, well, we just have a look and try it out, and maybe for now just sit there and I'll just be over here and let's just listen to the scene and see what it's like, which immediately depressurizes it for a start for everybody, and particularly for the actors. And then you run it and you go, everybody's kind of in a sort of listening mode, including the actors. And then what happens is, in a way, the ideas that you had all the way start to assert themselves, but they assert themselves through the doing, you know, and the things that you might be inclined to sort of over drill at the beginning, the actors will start to find it in the lines themselves. And also they will come with their own impulses. And if you're listening and watching carefully, you might find in the sort of heat of the moment, like on the day itself, in the real location, something will strike you all that's that little bit more interesting than what you had thought about doing. And yeah, so I think there are moments where I can remember scenes where something was discovered, where we threw something away that seemed really important in the script, or where we discovered something that wasn't in the script and that was better. And then in really micro ways, just changing lines and listening to them, because there's nothing like shooting to reveal the holes and the flaws that you can read a scene a million times and you can even rehearse it. And then when you sort of shoot it and you just go, why don't I believe that? You know, why is that not right? And I think the impulse to sort of bury your head is very strong then, because you might think, oh, well, we thought about this. This was the plan. It's probably right. And also most people around will say, yeah, like everybody wants, something I often say is it's a much nicer world when everybody says it's great. So there's a temptation for everybody to say it's great, because that everybody wants to leave at the end of the day going, that was good, wasn't it? Yeah, no, I thought that was good. And there's a way of describing your worries where you're requesting the person you're talking to tell you that it's fine. So you go, I mean, do you not think, I mean, could it have been a bit? And they'll go, no, I think it's good. And everybody, that's a happy place to leave it at the end, you know? Whereas sometimes if you go, I don't know why, but this is not quite working. There's an initial kind of, oh shit feeling from everybody on set. But it's usually as soon as you start working on it and discovering why and finding ways to do it in a more interesting way, there's a great sense of release, because everybody goes, yeah, I didn't think it was either, but you know, I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, it's like everyone's afraid when you say it.
Exactly. And then everybody kind of breathes a sigh of relief. It's like in any relationship, you know, if there's tension between two people, it goes on for ages usually, like, you know, in you and your other half or whatever. And then somebody says, so it's hard to bring it up, but when you do, everybody feels much better about it.
Yeah.
You also don't want to be the person who, you know, stops the machine when it's all kind of moving. Exactly. There's so many parts.
Exactly. I mean, I remember once, unlike what Richard did, I remember shooting a scene in the morning, and everybody, you know, it was one of those ones where there was a bit of pressure and we felt it was okay, and everybody felt it was okay. And there's this kind of mounting feeling, I think, that it wasn't as good as it could have been. And then at lunchtime, we talked about it and we said, you know what, it wasn't right, let's do it again. And we managed to do it again and actually still more or less make the day or move something else into the following day. But I was always so glad that we did that, because what we ended up with was something good. And it would have been really easy to say, well, it's probably all right, and the schedule says let's move on, so we should move on.
It's a tough one. Yeah, that balance. That was definitely something I was trying to work out over the weekend, just when to be in the flow and when to be kind of like, oh guys, this is really jamming and we need to take a moment. And it's kind of your role, but you know, you don't want to be that person either who's like forcing everyone to stop.
And the worry is if you do it in the wrong way, maybe people will lose confidence, or it'll feel like the wheel's coming off or something like that. And I don't think there's any rule that you can follow. I think you just have to sort of pick your moments and trust your instinct. And the more times you do it, the better. And actually, and I do think it's a virtuous, like there's a good thing that happens if you make a few films, especially if any of them are liked or you've had any success, it sort of becomes easier, because people just assume you know what you're doing. And if you go, you know what, this isn't great, let's just do this, they'll go, okay, fine, he probably knows what he's talking about. And I think actually that can come and bite you then. Like very established filmmakers towards the end of their career, when actually they're really starting to make some bad decisions, nobody will question them, you know? Like, and you see that all the time. You see films and you go, my God, how did that happen? And you think, well, that's a very established person. And everybody goes, well, they must know what they're talking about, you know. Not always true.
And with the
Tarantino and Woody Allen,
indeed,
with the earlier stuff you did with Mark, say Prosperity, then in Garage after, did all them ideas come from the envelope of ideas, or were they ideas he talked about and developed together?
No, that was Adam and Paul was the only one that came from the envelope. So Garage came from a conversation. Mark and I have been working on something else for a while, and it wasn't gelling properly. And then one day Mark said to me that he'd been talking to his mum, and his mum had told him about somebody that they knew from Ennis, on whom Josie is based. And something very similar had happened to this character that Mark remembered from his childhood and who he described really well. And I just think both of us felt in that moment that that was a much more interesting thing than the project that we were working on before it. And very quickly, I think what it was we talked and talked and talked, and I wrote a really basic sort of outline then, just like based on these conversations of what we'd had. And then Mark wrote in one go, I think, very close to the final script. Like, it's amazing. I've done lots of, like, Adam and Paul went through millions of drafts, but Garage didn't really. He just absolutely sort of hit it. And though things did change then in the doing, and things got changed again in the edit, it still bears a really close relation to that script. And then with Prosperity, that grew out of Adam and Paul, really, because Georgie is one of the characters in Adam and Paul. And I'm actually working with Mark on something else again, which is brilliant. And it's in that nice sort of space of just lots of conversations and his brilliant writing. And so it's been a great relationship. He always jokes that we plucked each other from obscurity.
Yeah, and it must be great to be back together. It's been a while. How long has it been since? Was it Garage? Last time you worked?
Prosperity was just after Garage, but it's been 10 years or 12 years. And in fact, I'm working with him on two things, because he's writing a film set in Ennis in the 1980s, which is brilliant. But he's actually one of the writers on the adaptation of Conversations with Friends. So sort of in the virtual writers' room, effectively, which has been like this, for the last 3 or 4 months. But yeah, so it's great to be properly working with him again.
Brilliant. And what did you learn? What was like one key thing you learned from, I guess, Adam and Paul and Garage and Prosperity, those kind of early works?
I mean, I think I learned to be, I think as I went, I learned to be looser in how I worked. So much of it is just sort of the accrual of like time on set, which is you can't sort of short circuit it, at least for me, just the hours on set and the amount of screen time that you make. Like, I think a whole bunch of instincts get refined, just even really, for me, I'm a very conscientious person, right, in a way, and I'm a kind of pessimistic person. So I would definitely be on, before I was so overanalyzing, like, I even remember like starting out, and you sort of feel like as a filmmaker, this idea that if you don't see everything, you should have everything, and then you decide later in the edit what you need. That I've grown further and further away from that, and I'm much more comfortable with going, none of that matters, or we'll just hear that, and no, I don't need to have a shot of them walking away, and I don't need that, and I don't need that, and these are the things that I really feel we need, and that way, you get to spend more time on the things that are important. That's a big sort of. It's not specific to any film. It's just a kind of a confidence or something that you can have. I think with Garage, again, I learned with both those films and with Prosperity, a lot of it is of that sort of kind. Like, I realized in going through the editing process of a film. So from the thinking conceptually about it really early to shooting to editing, what I learned was that, like, a lot of the material that you think a script needs, and this is, so I was talking there about shooting, but going right back to script, like, when I read scripts now, my kind of instinct to cut is so overwhelming. And I think I got that from making and from going through the process and realizing that a lot of the things you think you need, like these big pillars of like to support something, I was thinking about it, actually, it's much more like an archway. You can take all the bricks out from underneath, and in some way it sort of holds itself. And the less you use to the greater effect, the stronger the piece is. And people's ability, like understanding more how other people will see something. And I mean, I've found like sometimes with scenes when I've cut them, you sort of feel like the essence of them is still there somehow, because so much is like people's capacity to understand other people, to read them, to use very small cues to create very deep impressions. We do it all the time in real life. Like, you meet somebody in passing, like in the days when you might meet somebody in a bar before like our world changed. And, you might have like swap 2 sentences with them and so much about them already. And yet the conventional wisdom in screenwriting, especially like Hollywood screenwriting, is that you've got to like understand their backstory and you've got to have their psychological toolkit in your head when you're writing them and all of that stuff. And actually what we end up doing is just over specifying and overwriting and over making. And I think in the course of the first 2 or 3 projects, I learned to have a much lighter touch. Like there were so many things in both those films that I shot that I didn't use in the end. And I thought they were necessary to tell you who Josie was. And actually within 10 seconds of hearing him speak and watching him work, you know who he is. And I think I've got better at that. Probably better at calibrating performances as well. And knowing what might feel good in the rehearsal space or good in the audition or even good on the day can be too big in the end, and so just I don't know what it is. It's a sort of for me, a lot of the kind of analogies that I use are musical. So it's like just learning your instrument better and being able to sort of play it more delicately and leaving notes out and creating space and understanding how story ebbs and flows and how sometimes it's not in the scene itself where the emotional impact is felt, but it's in the scenes which follow. And I think I've got better at that, about creating these open spaces in something where I kind of know that for an audience, the implications of the scene before or the emotional resonances of the scene before will actually play much better in this seemingly very nondescript moments, And sometimes people will say, oh God, how do you do that thing if they like the way I work, where very little seems to be happening and yet it has weight. And the bad version of that is like the student short where the person is sitting like suffering in their bedsit and every effort is made to make that feel like incredibly powerful, but it just looks overwrought, and people say, well, in your stuff, sometimes I don't know why, but like nothing seems to be happening, but I'm feeling a lot. And I think really what that is it's about what happened before. It's about knowing how that space what will the echo be that you're listening to in that scene. Shots themselves don't contain, like, this sounds it's not fully true, but maybe I'll exaggerate for effect. Shots themselves don't contain any meaning. It's sequences of shots, unless you're doing photography, and photography is different, Film is narrative, or it's like it flows in time. So the idea that you could find the shot which in itself has the power, it only has the power in relation to what preceded it and what follows it and the overall kind of musical flow of the thing. I think I've got better at knowing when I've got that in when I'm shooting and knowing how it will play afterwards, maybe, but not. It's always a struggle. It's never easy.
Emma Dunne, when she worked with you, one of the best things she learned was that you kept stripping everything away. And I think there was a scene where the mom and the kid are in a bathtub and there was a whole load of dialogue and you suggested to just let them be in the bathtub together. Yeah. And she said it was a revelation for her because it was still as beautiful as she intended, but now she got to remove that dialogue. So I
think, the thing is, I'm also often talk to writers, and I write, but I write on everything I do, but I sort of like write in the background. And oh, here come the dogs, Jesus. But when I they were outside, so I realized now they just come in, so they're hysterical. When I'm working with writers, it's quite often, even when I'm reading a script, for quite a while. You read a script, and what happens is you go dialogue to dialogue, and you glance at the scene description, you glance at the heading, and in a writer's head, I think the focus is on that. And actually, but of course, like the cut itself to that new location, what's that doing? And the fact that somebody enters in the mood they have when they enter, what does that do? And all of this like massive amount of stuff that flows into the camera lens and is in the soundtrack and is in all these other things means that not everything has to be held in the dialogue. And it's, you know, I find sort of people are, you know, it's in really basic ways that we learn about screenwriting, like people telling you things that they want you to know, you know, and, you know, so often that you just have to challenge yourself and everybody you're working with to find better ways of doing that. You know, the way characters are often having conversations about things they already know, and they're only doing it because you need to, you know, the audience needs to know it. And like, I just try and find ways of distributing that work across the whole experience, visually, hourly, and in dialogue, so that it doesn't feel like you're ever being told something. It feels like you, here's another, like, again, it's the way I work, and it's not for everybody, and it doesn't work in other styles of filmmaking. But if what you're after is naturalism of a particular kind, it's sort of like, it's most powerful when it feels to the audience that they are discovering. Like, it's a really simple thing. It's just reverse the flow in your head as you think about filmmaking, instead of, you know, sort of like a kind of like a water cannon of meaning shooting out of the screen at people. If instead it feels to the audience that they have to lean in and they are discovering and making these connections, it's always more powerful in that regard. That's not the experience. Like, if you're watching you know, there are other sorts of films which don't work that way, and they shouldn't, and they're brilliant. But in the work that I do, or some of the filmmakers that I like to watch, I feel like if you feel that you have seen it rather than being told it, or told to think it, then it's so much better. And it's something that you like, because that's how the world works. You know, you are constructing it all the time. You're having to read the people who you meet. They're not telling you. And the trick is, of course, to still build in all the story stuff and all of the tension that you need, and still control the information. But it shouldn't feel like anybody's doing that. It should feel like it sort of just fell onto the screen in that way. And you know, the camera's where it should be, just because that's the obvious place to be.
And then what you're saying as well ties in with, I liked this metaphor you had for the architecture, and that you strip out all the pillars and you just end up with a perfect dome. Yeah. And if you built it right, it all leans in, and it's quite minimal almost. Yeah. The audience imagines into that. Exactly. Then they get to kind of...
Sometimes I think that we build so many pillars to support really flimsy structures. You know what I mean? It's all about the architecture of support. So the scenes are telling us things all the time, you know, that kind of, we understand what the dilemma of the character is. We sort of completely know it, or it's all there. And actually, yes, that's true. You have sort of solved the equation of the story if you do that. Yes, the character was unable to form relationships because of some previous trauma. They do undergo some catharsis because of a kind of thing that happens as we watch. And yes, I have those boxes are ticked, and therefore their kind of transformation at the end, I can see the pattern has been sort of carefully, you know, illustrated by the filmmaker. But actually, I probably don't, one doesn't feel it in a way, because like, it's so, if everything is so kind of telegraphed, and so subtlety is just, I don't know, it's really hard to pinpoint, and I can see lots of things that I've done and scenes that I've done where I haven't achieved it, you know, and it's still a bit clunky. And then I see filmmakers who appear to do it like way more, so in a way more sophisticated way than I do. So, you know, it's always
starting out for, I guess me and me are kind of at the same stage where we're coming from shorts now and beginning to write out, you know, our first features. And it's kind of that balance, isn't it, between, like, I'm big on character as well, and kind of what we're talking about structure. It's finding that balance though of having enough structure in it to have it makeable, you know, that people will maybe, you know, it's finding that balance, but not, you know, having it.
And of course,
it's hard. Yeah,
you're right, because we've all seen stuff where there are no pillars and actually there's just a pile of bricks. Like there's definitely, and when the intention was to do something fresh and unconventional and minimal, and you, like anybody who does anything creative, there is no formula for nailing that. There is just the attempt every time to get that balance right.
And I think it's your voice, isn't it? I think that's what with Adam and Paul and Garage, they had such a voice, and they weren't, you didn't see the structure in them. I didn't. You watched them. You just followed these characters wherever they went, and you didn't think about structure, where sometimes, you know, like you said, it's telegraphed. You're looking at, oh, that's there.
It's telegraphed. I will tell you, there were earlier cuts of both those films where you would have gone, but you know, that bumps, that clangs.
Yeah.
Like, you know, particularly with Garage, actually, and in a funny way, like it was in there because the performance was in there, and we did find these. I knew on a couple of occasions in Garage, I knew where we had really done something real, and it's like, I'll give you a couple of examples. So when I was working with Pat in advance of Garage, and I went down to Limerick and spent a few days with him to just kind of work on it, and Pat works very well physically, you know, and I like working that way too sometimes, you know, where you're not talking about, you know, you're not talking in psychological terms, you're talking more in kind of terms of what's the tone of that character, like how do they hold themselves, what do they sound like, what do they feel like when they walk into a room. And Pat, like, we were messing, it wasn't nothing, and then eventually we sort of found this walk and this voice and everything, and it was like that, I could just see him then, right? That was brilliant. And then Pat would do a thing where Pat has this thing he was doing with his mouth where he just went, he sort of, I don't know, did something with the muscles in his chin. And all it was me going, that's there, that thing is really good and really important. And it's like, we know that we could both feel what it was. It was an uncertainty, and it was a way of that character expressing a certain kind of upset that was very minimal, but it was there, right? And I remember, and we talked about where his, like, the focus and how he would think. We talked about how he sort of, his experience of upset always was much later. You know, he had a delayed way of processing things. And so I remember when there's that very powerful scene where he shows the porno to the kid, and the kid gets upset and leaves, and Josie kind of can tell something wrong is happening, and he tries to bring him back, and the kid runs out, and Josie runs out afterwards. It's one of the only, like, you know, bits where the camera's very still in Garage, but there we were quite loose. And we follow him out, and he stops and he calls David out the road, and he just watches him. And we spent ages on that close-up. It was one of the first times, and I use close-ups a lot. It's one of the first times where I kind of got into my groove with close-ups, which is a certain kind of real close-up. It's not like just a formal sort of, you know, grammar of film, mids, wides, and close. It was like how do you study a face in this way and holding it in a certain way? And I talked him through that, and I was talking about where his eye, and just to defocus his eyes and to hold it, and the mouth. And even though it was quite mechanical in a way, it wasn't. It was, and we were both sort of trying to find that moment, and then he hit it for about 5 or 10 seconds of just this sense of absolute grief that he wasn't even aware that he was feeling. You could just see it. And that was one of those moments where you go, well, we have a film, because that was beautiful, but you could feel it. But then you start putting all this stuff together in the edit, and it's bumpy and it's not right. And there's scenes that we then cut, which were still in it for ages and ages. And I remember very close to the end, when we were really ready to lock picture, I sat in the edit and I cut like myself on the Avid, like 7 or 8 minutes out of the end of the film in 2 chunks, I think. And I felt, and I was like, and the analogy I used, like tuning a guitar string or something. You kind of, it's boing, 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 boing. It's crap, 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 boing, boing, boing. And only when you like get to the tension quite right does it start to make a note. And it was really that, like those final cuts where I said goodbye to stuff that I thought was good, but I wasn't really doing it, that created that feeling in Garage that allowed the whole film to sort of have that note, because it's so minimal. Like there's one music cue in the middle of the film. Every other scene is without music apart from the credits and the titles and the credits. And only that by getting it sort of like to that point, then suddenly the thing that you've made, like the bit of music that you've made, felt like it was actually real. But it was all in there, you know. It's just hard to sort of, but it was removing. It was by removal that we found that note.
So there's a lot of discovery in the edit for you.
Definitely. And some are easier than others in the edit. I mean, and you can fall in love with the first cut, you know. It's funny. That's harder actually. If the first cut feels like, oh, actually, wow, that's not bad. Long and everything, and you know it's going to tighten, but you feel it's quite good. That usually means you're going to be much longer in the edit, because what happens is you have to fall out. I always say you have to fall out of love with it. If you like it a bit too much at the beginning, you kind of you sort of settle in, and then it's hard to. So you have to watch it enough to start to really go, oh, start to get a bit sick of it, and then discover it again. Whereas some of the films, I think, Room probably was pretty powerful from the beginning, but it took a lot of time to sort of find its best version. But it didn't change structure at all, really. It really stayed like that we sort of got it right, I think, in our thinking about the film. And then it was delicate sort of shifts and changes and cuts and whatever. Whereas I think Frank took ages. It was like such a mad sort of, you know, incredible confection of oddness that we found ourselves in the edit going, I really like that scene, and this is great, and he's brilliant here, and this is a bit odd, but what, or, you know, how do we wrangle it into something which sort of, you know, takes these odd turns, and how do you hold an audience through these left turns and changes in tone, and which is always something I've been interested in, changes in tone. I mean, Garage is probably the first one. Adam and Paul actually changes very strongly from the just what feels like you're going to be allowed to enjoy this farce, and then it makes it harder for you to sort of laugh at as it goes on. I think Garage does the same. You think, oh, I know who this guy is. He's sort of figure of fun, and I can participate in that view of him alongside the town. And then by the time it's finished, I hope you feel he's an unknowable, deep, sort of infinitely fascinating human being, like every other human being is. That was the aim, to sort of say, let's take this character who's the butt of all the jokes and turn him into something which is sort of ineffable and transcendent and profound. You know, which for those for whom the film works, I think something of that's there. And then Frank does it a bit as well, in that it, you know, it's much richer and darker by the end than it is at the beginning. And then other ones are different. Room is very different, and although it's also in 2 halves, and I seem to do that quite a bit.
And with
you know.
them, with the post projects, how did you go about deciding on the films to make from there on? How do you generally settle on, this is the next film I want to make? Is it something that pure chat?
That's the hardest of all decisions. Combination of chat. So and the challenges are different at different points for me, of my sort of journey, because there were big gaps at the beginning, because we hadn't thought of anything after Adam and Paul, and we weren't expecting it to have the sort of life that it did. It nearly didn't get released at all, actually. It was just one distributor said, "Oh, sure, okay, we'll have a go," and then it actually really took off in Ireland. It really took off, but we didn't have anything to follow it. So I went back. I was doing commercials. Mark and I were talking, and it took that one failed attempt at something, and then Garage. So we made Adam and Paul in 2003. I think it was released in 2004. I didn't shoot till 2007 again on a feature. It was like 3 years. I think it was about 3 or 4 years gap. And then after that, there was another gap. And we did Prosperity, which was great. But myself and Mark, we couldn't get it. I don't know. I think we needed to break from each other, and we were sort of like nothing was working. And I was beginning to think, oh God, that was great, but that was it now. That was it was brilliant while it lasted, and we won't do another one. But what had happened was Film 4 had become involved in Garage, and I became sort of close with Tessa Ross, who's this amazing woman who ran Film 4 for a long time, and it's sort of like a legendary sort of exec in Britain. And she sort of decided to sort of, anoint me with her kind of, with her gaze. She liked Adam and Paul. Adam and Paul had been with Film 4, but this guy, and Tessa went, "Ooh, this small experimental film is interesting," and we got talking, and we did Garage, and then Tessa said, "There's this thing called Frank, and you should really look at it." And I said, "Well, I don't know. I've never really looked at I've always sort of developed everything internally." And she said, and she has this brilliant way of just sort of, she's got this great authority. She said, just meet them and talk to them. And I met them, and I read the scripts, and I thought, it's bonkers and it can't be made. And then I couldn't get out of my head, and I said, okay, well, and we worked on it for a few years, actually. It did change a lot. But while that was happening, while I was waiting for Frank, Ed, who has been this like amazing presence in my life, really, and who knows me very well and knows how to sort of finagle me into doing things that I'm sort of, I'm always kind of like, I'm always sort of like, oh, I don't know. And Ed said, look, there's this story, and it was a book by Kevin Power, Bad Day at Black Rock. And I read it, and he said, I think there might be something in it. And Mal Campbell, who's a writer who is married to somebody that I work with, was interested in it as well. And I read it, and I thought, I'm not interested in the overall story, which was a multi-perspective view of something very close to the original Annabelle's case. And I was uneasy about being too close to the Annabelle's case, but also I wasn't interested in the multi-strand way that he told it. But there was one character, the character of Richard, who was this kind of kid who'd been like the most liked and the most successful one in the class. And I started to think about that because I went to school with people like that. And I thought it would be really interesting to tell the story only from their point of view, and to tell the story of the person, like most high school stories or stories about people at that point in life concentrate on the outsider and the one who everybody hates, because that's normally who the writer actually is in school, like all of us were probably the ones that everybody thought were a bit weird. So we identify, that's why you get so many films about so many high school films about the person who nobody liked. But I always found it really interesting to think about the other people, the people who have these massive expectations on them. And so while that was happening, while I was thinking about Frank and also working on some other stuff of my own, and in fact, pursuing Room, this thing sort of got into my head, and myself and Malk did it with Ed's blessing, and this is again Ed's brilliance, just said, well, I don't know if I want to make it, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't mind exploring it a bit more. And so Ed reeling me in a bit more, said, great. And I said, we could like start talking to some actors. I thought, I don't know that generation anymore. And so we actually cast before. We said, look, we've got a bit of development money together, and gathered a group of people, including Jack Rayner and a bunch of other people who ended up in the film, and started talking about their lives and connecting them to the characters in the story. And actually, in the end, I got so interested in it, I said, yeah, I really do want to make it. So that's how that one came up. That wasn't, that was a brilliant position to be in, to be sort of facilitated like that and encouraged by somebody like Ed. And And Frank then was this thing that I got, Tessa said you should, and I started getting obsessed with it, and then I did it. And Room, I read the novel. Ed gave me the novel again and said, read this, you're going to like it. And I absolutely loved it. And then at this end, like, so at the beginning, I couldn't get arrested like every other filmmaker, and getting Adam and Paul off the ground was a big struggle. And then that was good enough, and Garage happened, and then it started to become a bit easier. At this end of things, it's different because I actually have lots of options, and I find that as difficult a position to be in as the having no options was, because then you sort of go, actually, first of all, it's are you the person that you think you are? Because I always think about this. At the beginning, I would happily say, oh, I'd never do a blockbuster. That sort of cinema is just, it's not my bag. And we're turning, like Scorsese says, we're turning cinema into kind of a theme park ride. And, and you think, and it's really easy to be a purist when nobody's actually asking you to do anything, It's so easy I'd never do that. They could offer me 10 million and I'd still say no. Wait until they phone you and then see what you think. So now that I did discover ultimately that I don't want to do those films because I haven't, maybe I will at some point, but I haven't felt, so that's been okay. I haven't been sort of distracted in that way, but I do feel I get sent lots of really good projects, and I get sent lots of really good books, particularly because I've had success in adapting things. And sometimes it's really easy to not do the projects that I know in my heart are the ones that I should be concentrating on, because they're hard and personal. And there are these lovely, really interesting things that I know I would have absolutely killed for at an earlier point. And they're here, and surely I should just say, oh, well, I will do this. And actually that Normal People was that, which is an amazing project. And I'm not for a moment saying I'm blessed to have been entrusted with it. But I came off the back of Room going, I'm not, twice, in fact, I'm not going to do any more adaptations for a while. I'm going to write these projects that I've been banging on about and boring everybody stupid about for ages. And then The Little Stranger came up, which I had tried to option before Room, before Frank even, and had not got it. And then I got to do it. And then Normal People, Ed said, you might be interested in this. And I said, well, Ed, I'm going to read it because, obviously, of course I'm going to read it, but I just will say I'm probably not going to do it, or not going to throw my hat in the ring. We didn't have the rights at that point. And then I read it and I just became so obsessed with it because it so fits my style that I thought I can't bear anybody else to have it. So I'm going to go out there and try and get it. So the answer to, again, long-winded answer is that I never know how the decision is going to be made. And sometimes I just end up in a situation where I can't bear not to do it. And that's the reason I do it.
Nice.
I have two small questions. One is, do you split your edit into two chunks, or do you do the whole thing and then you're done?
I love it when you can split it into two chunks. And sometimes that happens naturally, like you get like Christmas or something. But in television world, that's impossible because it's like a big machine. Like, so in Normal People, I only shot the first 6, and Hetty MacDonald brilliantly shot the last 6. But nevertheless, it's like it's like a sausage factory from the moment you start shooting. Everything's on a schedule. You have to deliver to a broadcaster by a certain date. And there's no sort of, whereas on the features, you can go, you know what? I just need 2 weeks to sit and think about this. I think it's really healthy if you can take a break. Are you going to do that, Mia, on your short? Are you going to take a break?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think it's amazing. You just need to step away because you get too deep inside of the story and you can't really see it after a while. So.
Absolutely.
But it is a luxury. It's not always feasible,
I mean, the one thing that can be really useful is, well, it's also like I think that you probably only get a few clean watches of something you've made through the whole edit, Sometimes you watch it and we try to ration the watches to maybe once every couple of weeks, even less at the beginning. And a lot of time you watch and all you're watching is you're anticipating every cut and you're watching the things that you already decided on. And you're just, and they're more or less useless, those watches. And if you're lucky, you'll have one or two where you sit there, just like I talked about when you're shooting, and you manage to sort of fool yourself into forgetting about what you thought you were doing. And you watch it like you might watch it if you were somebody who didn't know anything about it. And those are worth everything, because everything you feel when you watch that is usually true. Why is, you get these incredible insights like, that's awful, or, that's such a bump. You feel the bump and you wonder why you ever thought that was a good idea. And they're like, the ignorance of your approach to those viewings is the key. Not knowing is, I mean, I'm a big fan of that, being able to have phases of just switching off what you know about the project, and that there's just great learning to be done there.
And then my other question was, you've this great knack of finding talented people who are kind of unknown, and then they're in your film, and then they suddenly have their career is launched. And that's happened with a lot of people. And is that sort of almost your agenda in a way, or how is that?
No, I've never thought about it other than to look back on it and go, God, that's amazing. I just go with my guts when it comes to casting. And I do think, and again, maybe there's a truth to the fact that I am drawn to, I love working with people who are unknown. I think because it leads to a very pure experience for the person watching, because there are no other films or pieces of television that comes with that actor. And I think quite a lot of the time with very well-known actors, you have to spend the first little bit of a film forgetting that it's them, whereas I was so lucky, say with Jack it tends to be possible when you're working with young, when the parts are for younger actors, because really good actors will have a lot of the time will have announced themselves by the time they're in their middle age or whatever, but not always. And I like that a lot. And so with Brie on Room, or it's so funny to watch that, and you watch Brie suddenly, like just becoming this absolute like megastar and doing these massive movies. And she had been in a brilliant film, so I shouldn't a film called Short Term 12. I don't know if anybody's seen that. So that's why I cast her. Well, I met her out of that, and then met her. But yeah, and I with Daisy and Paul, I suppose Paul particularly, who had been in one commercial before Normal People. But he was a great theater actor. It's not like I discovered him, working in Subway or something. He announced him, he was an actor already. So I don't want to give myself too much credit.
It's great though. It kind of just brings a freshness to the work as well. Like you say, we're not familiar with those people, but they're amazing to watch. They're utterly talented, and so you've no reference for them, which is a nice way to watch an actor. There's no baggage attached.
It's brilliant when and also I like it because you get people at a very sort of lovely phase in their career where they're absolutely open, and in a funny way. And I'm not suggesting this is true of every actor that's established, but there is some degree to which an older actor will, or a more established actor is protecting something, protecting a career that they've already built up. There is a lovely natural handing over of like a young actor or an actor who's starting out, who goes, it's just this fresh sort of thing. And I find as well that, like, working on what Richard did, or Normal People, when you've got really young cast and you're an older director, it's just a lovely relationship for me, and I had to learn. I think one of the things I had to learn when I went on to make films was just how different it is sometimes with very established people, and how the sort of the tension that can exist on set, and how to manage that as a director, and how to work with people who are really, really established, and have a lot of authority. If they don't like something and they don't think you're doing it right, or they think it could be better, they're not afraid to say. It's not the pure, director-actor relationship that you would love to sort of imagine is always the case, where you know, you have to fight for your authority sometimes, and that's a whole different sort of part of the and it gets easier actually the more you do, and the more, if you have some success, that gets easier as well. But sometimes you have to sort of deal with that, you know. I don't know how to describe it, but yeah, everybody knows it. You know, it's you know, it's something, it's well known sort of thing that can happen on set, where there are like other egos that are big and not just yours. You know,
a creative conflict,
exactly.
Yeah. And what would you say, I guess at this point, has been your like greatest lesson in the last, maybe from Normal People or even going back before that?
I mean, there's probably no one lesson, and I always think I should probably prepare a few thoughts about that, because it is a question that comes up. I think I said it to you, Mia, when we were talking. One really big practical lesson for me is just learning to not like be quiet a lot. Like there's a sort of intent, like listening and watching, that you never get to do if you're constantly in the sort of mode that I might have been in early, where I would feel like I had to really prove myself and sort of come in with all the answers and inspire everybody in some sort of fantasy way of like, you know, like the maestro who says the most perfect thing, you know. And I think that idea of shutting up and sort of of realizing that the ways in which you can achieve things, often it's better if nobody really even ever quite knows how that happened. You don't always, you know, you always hear these anecdotes, right? If you're a director who reads books about directors or watches documentaries about directors, you will always hear these anecdotes of an actor saying, and then they turned around to me and they said, blah, and that just, everything made sense. And, you know, and maybe there are a few moments like that, but actually don't go looking for them, you know. Be prepared to sort of recede a little bit and watch. And that, I think that like a bit of sort of humility or something has helped me a lot, to not feel I have to kind of, you know, prove myself, because, you know, I'm not also, I don't know, just to sort of, yeah, just to be quiet and to listen and to watch. And that's probably the thing that I've learned to value more than anything else.
Yeah, you said that to me before my shoot as well, and it was amazing to hear that. And it like your ego is tangled up with the work, and you have to kind of pull it back again. And part of that is just listening to the actors or listening to the cinematographer, or whatever creative energy they have.
And if you do that, you know what? What's amazing? People then, like if you take things and you listen and you respond and you like are clearly open to what's coming from other people, when you do come back with a thought, it counts much more. I don't know. It seems to me people really listen more to you if you listen to them, and it speaks to a certain confidence, like a deeper confidence maybe, that you're prepared to do that. And all the bluster and bravado and often machismo connected to the film, to the flora in film, is really not all that helpful. I think it's changed. It has changed. Like, so I've been doing this for quite a long time now, and I have really noticed the change. And a lot of that is because the culture has changed generally. Like a sort of kind of low-level bullying that would have happened quite a bit, and I never would tolerate it on the set at all, from when I was, even from early on. But I probably like played along with it at some stages, you know, certainly when, you know, and that kind of like very male orientated camera departments and everything, where you know, it's just all a bit less thoughtful than it is now. I think that's a huge improvement, and it's a big, like, I don't know, it's just it's a big change culturally across, and long may it continue. But I think it facilitates that approach more Whereas in the old days, like, and I know there are some actors who still believe you're supposed to test the director early in the process, and it's so tiresome and it's so unnecessary. You know, but I think that's happening less and less.
And another impact of this cultural shift in the industry, I think, was really present in normal people, in how you approach the sex scenes, and how the actors were really respected, and there was so much dialogue, and it was not like the olden days of, you know, you'd hear nasty stories about how they tricked the actors into doing something.
Let's get everybody drunk. I mean, that happened back in the day. Yeah, I think that's true, and we really had to think a lot about that, because we knew that there was going to, I mean, intimacy and like really kind of truthful sex is a huge part of what the story is about. So, you know, we knew from the very beginning that we wanted to do that, and then we put real thought into how to do that in a way which felt good for the actors and felt like everybody was listened to and respected. And we worked with an intimacy coordinator, and I highly recommend that. I was quite skeptical at the beginning. I thought, who's coming onto my set to tell me how to, you know, and of course, Isha, who did it, so good. She wasn't doing that at all. She just wanted to know what we wanted, and then sort of created a space for the actors where they could like talk to her and say, "Ooh, I don't know about that." And that was liberating for me, because it meant I could say, "I think we should do this," and I didn't feel like the actors were going to go, "Oh, well, we better say that's great because we don't want to upset Lenny," you know, which would just make me not want to ask, you know. So the whole thing became just really grown up, actually, and.
It made the show feel groundbreaking, because so much television has gratuitous sex and sex from the male gaze, and this just felt like authentic sex and vulnerable sex, and it made it much more interesting to watch. It made it felt really groundbreaking as a TV show because of that. Brilliant.
And like, it's funny because I do remember years and years ago being interviewed by somebody, a French journalist. I think it stuck in my head, and this is ego, and actually, but I'll tell it anyway. And I remember she said to me, "Oh, the sex in all your movies is terrible." Like, so she was referring to like, so, you know, John in the tub in Frank basically getting attacked by Maggie Gyllenhaal. You know, it's just comedy nightmare sex. And then I did in Prosperity, there's a scene, you know, where the woman who works as a cleaner kind of has sex with the boss of the company, and it's really compromised and bad. And all the sex that I've ever showed has been sort of within the context of something pretty dark, because I tend to tell quite dark stories. And she said, "Oh, what is it about you that, you know, what do you, you know, are you hung up about it?" I remember thinking, no. I remember saying, no, that's just what was required in those stories. And I said, one day I will. And then I remember somebody else writing, I think Donald Clark wrote this thing about why are there no good sex scenes in Irish? What in Irish film? What's wrong with us? And I remember reading people when I knew I wanted to do it and thinking, great, now we are going to do it right. We're going to have Irish people on screen, and it's going to be really good. And it was a great sort of sense of liberation to be able to do that.
And it's kind of true. We don't, I mean, we're not the sexiest country. We've a bit of work to do to catch up with our neighbours,
my wife's across Polish, the water. And she's like, you just have to ask her about that. Yeah, she's like, what is wrong with you all?
Yeah. But we're working on it, but it expresses itself in our cinema and in our television. And so in that regard, when I saw Normal People, I just thought, oh, it just went to the next place.
Thank you.
So I think it'll open doors for other films and TV shows coming out of this country to be vulnerable with sex, to be honest, to be like much more sensual, and all the other ingredients that have been missing for quite a long time.
I think we want
for
questions, sure. Lenny.
Are we? I don't know how we're doing for.
Yeah, I am, absolutely. Let's go for it.
Yeah. You got a few there, Mia?
Are there a few there? Yeah, let me have a look here. So James Vincent said, "Hi Lenny, what factors within a script help you make the decision that you want to produce it?"
I think for me, there's usually some, and sometimes it's pre-script because I'd usually get involved early, but same point really applies. It's usually a character or a pair of characters where I think there's something that I don't fully understand that I'd love to understand, or there's some depth there that I feel like a film could help kind of get into. So it's usually It's usually that or a tonal thing rather than, oh, I love the twist or I love the plot or whatever. It's a character and a certain kind of tonal space.
There's one from Stephen McKeown. He says, do you feel that success as a filmmaker makes it easier or more difficult to maintain your artistic vision?
I mean, I think like, you know, it should make it easier. But it does put it there are temptations, you know, because one thing that I think is very hard, because it's quite built into us as people, and it's also built into the culture, is this idea that life is a ladder that you're trying to climb up, you know. So, oh, you know, you make a film and it's successful, so you should make a bigger one, and then you should make a bigger one, and then you should make a bigger one, because that's obvious. And I think it's very easy to get trapped in that and think, you know, how do I top this or whatever. And so I think the danger is, and that's why I really respect people who do, like Ken Loach, for example, who just doesn't, you know, it's just about the stories. It's not always the style that I like most, but I just respect him as a person. And then, you know, there are some really great filmmakers who are just really uncompromising. So I think that's the temptation that you have to try and resist. But actually, it's a privilege to be able to sort of to have more ease in getting things made. I mean, and then it's up to you to try and use that in a sort of way that's valuable and not just, you know, greedy.
There's one from Joan Sweeney.
Go ahead.
Eva Bertisel was asking, hi, Eva here. How many test screenings or opinions do you listen to during the edit before you decide on the final cut?
Well, my preference is none, I have to say, but that's not always possible. So, yeah, I mean, what I would do is usually show things to a few people that I really trust, and those are really interesting, because I do think actually watching a film with other people in the room that don't know it is an incredibly useful thing to do, because somehow you don't really watch it until there are other people there, and then things that seemed okay, you kind of know they're not, or things that you weren't sure about, you sort of know what they mean. And I really like that, and I would maybe do that 2 or 3 times. And then we didn't test room. I was obliged to test on The Little Stranger, and I found that really kind of painful, because it was one of those structured tests where they ask people to fill in a questionnaire afterwards, and then you sit down with a data analyst person who tells you where the weak points in your film are and stuff. I found that really just unbelievably painful. But I know people who find them useful, so I don't want to be completely kind of negative about it. So yeah, my ideal would be 2 or 3 screenings for sort of friends and family, that I can sit there, Nathan, the editor, can sit there, the whole gang, and sort of feel the room. And that's not always to say that you want to make things comfortable for people. So it's not about sort of, oh, it gets a bit sour there, so let's add 2 more teaspoons of sugar, you know, which is what the kind of commercial testing thing is. Everybody should love it all the time. Well, what about if no, maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should feel deeply uncomfortable for ages. Maybe that's a more interesting film. So that my version of the positive test screening with friends and family is just, I can kind of feel the film more like truthfully when there are other people there. And then those people's views I'm really interested in, you know, and we don't always take it. And thankfully I've always had final cut. So even with The Little Stranger, which was a spectacular failure in terms of its box office or whatever, but I feel I love and I'm really proud of, and I think partially the failure was that they insisted on releasing it as a horror movie, even though it's not. I didn't have to change anything, but I did have to sit and listen to everybody's, you know, tuppence worth, which was pretty painful.
And McIntyre asked, what was the best piece of advice you've ever been given about screenwriting?
Oh, I think it's the sort of stuff that I said, which is that very little goes a long way. Like, much more information is contained. Like, it's not just that thing on the page. It's also the human face, you know. That's what I'd say. Like, you know, you know, people that you've never met before that you buy a packet of chewing gum from in a shop, you will be able to tell. You'd be able. What the dog was just? Sorry, I thought she was eating through the cable. You'd be able to tell what sort. You could say if they were sort of their general mood and feeling and flavor and sort of history and lots. You will be able to tell from that. And I would often say that to screenwriters, like, you don't have to tell the audience everything; they will see 90% of it.
One from Joan Sweeney. Who is a director that you admire?
Oh, I have a bunch. I mean, so many that I'm sort of in awe of. I mean, the ones that I watched, you know, when I was obsessively watching films, like the European greats, all of those people, the Russians and the so many brilliant Japanese filmmakers that I absolutely love. Ozu, I love. Like, the stuff is so classical and so shot in such a kind of formal way, and yet it's so achingly deep, and I find that amazing. I have to hunt around and search and mess around to get to that point. He just seems to be able to, like, go, yeah. I love like Lynn Ramsey. I like a lot. For example, You Were Never Really There, I think, or You're Never Really There. I think it's a masterpiece. Yeah. I can't believe it didn't get every award that year. I saw, like, it's not my heartland, but when I saw Parasite, I thought that is just somebody at the absolute top of their game. I mean, it's just unbelievable. The control is like watching an acrobat or a juggler or something. It's incredible. And I think, Ruben Östlund, The Square and Force Majeure, is another filmmaker who's just like unbelievably good at what they do, just like sort of spectacularly good. There was a film, Father and Daughter Living Off the Grid.
Winter's Bone.
Deborah Granick,
Leave No Trace.
Filmmaker. Yeah. Not Winter's Bone. No Trace. Leave No Trace. No, it's just amazing. It's a brilliant, brilliant film. I think she's amazing. So a lot of people.
Any more there, Tristan?
See here. One here. The colors blue and yellow seem to be ever present in normal people. Was there significance to this? I think you already said you weren't big on the symbolism.
No, not really. I mean, you know, actually, this feeds in a little bit into a question I saw there, which was about somebody saying, you know, do you find it hard to bring the how's it been to work with a colorist Irish post house? And the BBC can be picky about using UK production houses. Was it difficult to convince them? There are brilliant people here. So, like Susie Lavelle, who's the DP, and Gary Curran, the colorist I work with all the time here. They're absolutely brilliant. So we do find, like, things do come in, and there aren't sort of specific meanings around color, but you do find a sort of world or a palette that somehow, again, it's pretty instinctual for me. But no, I don't think about them as sort of representing anything, not explicitly or consciously anyway.
One from Emma Fine. Any advice on someone planning to direct their first short with no budget?
I would say, and we did this on Adam and Paul, like, we knew we wouldn't have very much money, and so everything we did was sort of designed to work that way. Don't try and do things that would be much better done if you did have a budget. I would urge anyway. And then, of course, there are millions of examples that prove this wrong. People who do unbelievably, outrageously sort of ambitious things successfully without a budget. But personally, I would say, if you write towards that, you know, the most amazing thing ever made could be made with two people in a room with natural light, you know. So don't make yourself, try not to challenge yourself to do things which will take all your energy away from the stuff that probably matters most, which is what's occurring between the people in the story.
One from Karima Dillon. Over the course of your working relationship with composer Stephen Rennicks, has the process of your director-composer workflow changed?
That's a really good question. Yes, I think it probably has. And Stephen would probably like probably look over his glasses at me if he was here, because I'd say that actually that was one of the hardest parts of Normal People, because I would normally spend a lot of time with Stephen, you know, because we've been friends again. Actually, we've been friends since we were at primary school. It's about 9 years old. And he was always much better at music than I was, and I love music, but he was always much better at all the instruments than I was. And so it was just really natural that he would do the music, you know. And I think I spent, like on Frank, we spent so much time together, and that was just a good part of the process of building a score. And on Normal People, because of the relentlessness of schedule, it became much more mechanical. I think both of us found that really difficult. So I think what we've promised each other on the next thing that we do is that we will try and go back, no matter what the situation is, to that old thing of just hanging out and talking and listening to things together and doing all that, because that's where the richness comes from. So I think, yeah, the pattern is to sort of, it became more kind of conventional, and now we want to go back to making it sort of the way it was when we were all in a gang hut together.
Yeah.
Do you bring music in? Like, where in the process do you start working with composer?
Actually, really, yeah. So sound and composer much earlier than normal would be the answer for me. Much earlier than is conventional. So, and actually, I always have that conversation with the post-production supervisor, or, you know, if there are different people on the job, I'll always say, look, just so you know, we usually bring sound post in right at the beginning almost of the edit. So they're working in parallel with the picture cut. I really like that. Gives them a chance to be involved, not just handing it over for like X number of weeks at the end. And with Stephen, like, so on what I'm about to do now, we've had conversations already, and I'm still a month out from starting the shoot. If we, you know, depending on what happens, I'm supposed to be shooting in Belfast, and that's it looks to be a bit tricky at the moment. So yeah, we've already been talking about it, and he would start to send me things. And then I do this thing, whereas I always have a bunch of pieces of music which I gather as I'm thinking about something. And they don't always represent what the music will be in the end, but I find them somehow useful in thinking about the film or the telly. And I would share that with Stephen as well. So early.
Yeah, because the music can shape the edit quite a lot.
Here's the thing that's really difficult. Like, so sometimes there's a little tension in that Nathan Nugent is a very brilliant editor that I've worked with on 4 features and 2 TV shows. And Nathan is really good. He's really musical, and he's got a brilliant sort of encyclopedic reference, and he pulls amazing temp in. And sometimes I would sometimes do that as well. But I'm inclined to think now, and it's hard not to, because it's just really helps in the cutting, and it's really helps in screenings as well for executives and things. But I'm inclined to think that we should resist that temptation and push to work more with the composer's first sketches, even if they're rougher. Because temp is really tempting, because you have the entire history of the world's music recorded under the most perfect circumstances to put against your picture. And then what can happen very easily is that the composer just ends up having to kind of do something like the temp.
Close it down a little.
I don't think that's the best way to bring a really interesting soundtrack out. It does. Absolutely.
And your brain.
Oh, sorry. No, just there's a question from Paul Butler Lennox here. And he said, how important, Lenny, is friendship, loyalty, and support in terms of successful creative career and responding to rejection? Because obviously you've had the relationships with Ed and Steve.
Yeah. It just massively, to me, hugely important. I mean, as I said earlier on, I am quite sort of, I have a good sort of sense of humor, and I'm resilient in lots of ways. You know, I can work hard, and I can deal with a lot of stress, but I'm quite pessimistic as a person, or quite kind of, I can think negatively quite easily, which is why I had those periods of time where I wasn't being creative and I was being really hard on myself. And everything about the fact that I've been able to sort of have a career and everything really does come down to those relationships for me. I think other people are able to work in different ways, and some people thrive on a kind of a different sort of isolation, or a sort of, sense of having to, kick the doors down themselves. But I really need that friendship and that loyalty. And I'm so lucky that the people that I was friends with also happen to be really good at what they do. Like it's such. I really feel that that's my biggest sort of secret weapon. That I have a relationship with a producer that I know it's the thing that makes other directors jealous. Is that actually? It's just the fortuitous sort of thing of having a relationship with a great producer who we both believe in each other and trust each other. And then with all these other people, like with Stephen, and so I work, like I'm about to do my second film with Susie Lavelle. I've made loads of films with Nathan, and I just value that. I think if you're starting out, so for people who are watching this who are really early in their careers and thinking about sort of like, that struggle. If there are people at the same point in their career as you are in yours, and you have that connection with them, that is, it's so much better to have that like group, even if it's just two people. It's really empowering. And I think that this network in itself is another example of that, of like gathering people together to support each other, to like encourage each other, because it can be really lonely. Because at the beginning, I find that idea, I always think about it of being unobserved. Like you could be sitting writing, and it's very hard sometimes to sustain that when you know that nobody else gives a monkeys about what you're doing. So then you know you're doing it, and to have sitting in your room, it's like nobody cares, and you could just easily go, oh, who cares? But actually, if somebody else is saying to you, hey, I tell you, you were supposed to send me that last night, or you're going to meet them the next day to work together, that becomes a real thing in the world.
Like you're in a band technically, as opposed to a solo artist. You've got these like people surrounding. Yeah,
you're in a band. That is
guys,
exactly
I'm afraid I have to be the bad cop and jump in and go.
Hi, Paul.
Other things to do, unfortunately. Lenny, I just want to say thanks very much, obviously, but also just testament to what type of guy Lenny is. When we were doing the podcast, he said at the end, if there's anything else that I can do, let me know. And we asked him to do something else, and he responded and did it straight away. So it says a lot about the man. Thank you so much for your time. It means a lot to us, and everybody else listening. So can I get a round of applause by getting some X's, not only for Lenny, but for me and Tristan and the wonderful community that you all are. And Merry Christmas to everybody. Merry Christmas, everyone!
Pleasure.
I'm going to go off and have my dinner now.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks a million, everybody. Thanks, Mia. Thank you, Tristan. Lovely to meet you. And best of luck to everybody. I hope everybody's work.
Thank you so much, Len. Really appreciate it. Guys, jump on the network.
Christmas. Yeah, likewise.
Think of it as checking in on a neighbour and sticking your head over the garden fence. Jump on the networking section there on the left-hand side. Say hello. They're little 2-minute little short speed dating chat roulette chats. Then at 9:15, but we may run a little bit later, we'll do a draw for lots of prizes, including copies of Normal People. So thank you very much. Jump on the network, and I'll see you all back for 9:15. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas.